The introduction of Drom Perringonson. Drom is a 33-year-old bar owner in central London. His bar is called the Badger's Beard. He has a heart of gold, incredible sense of humour, and is very much a people person. He is a bald, stocky guy with big shoulders and arms, has a perfect beard that always changed shape and colour throughout the day, and sports a beer belly which he named Terry. He loved being a bar owner, but is aching for some adventure. His main passion in life is metal detecting and collecting fossils and Viking artifacts. He lives above his bar in a big apartment that's full of books and old maps relating to Viking sagas and mythology. He has a small mantle that displays things he found whilst metal detecting, although nothing of significant value, not that he would sell them anyway. What he prizes the most is a perfect conditioned fossil of the first ever pufferfish species to exist, possibly from the Jurassic era. Drom wasn't superstitious, but always had a feeling that the fossil brought him good luck. Also, pufferfishes are Drom's favourite animal, and he thinks they are super cute. Drom dreamt of doing a solo tour of Scandinavia with his metal detector. He spent 5 years training how to rock climb, canoe, and watched back-to-back Bear Grylls and Ray Mears so he could survive in the elements if he needed to. That's if he even got to go on his adventure. It was a quiet night at Drom's bar. A few regulars dotted around on different tables, but it somehow made the bar feel empty. Drom thought to himself, "Screw this, gonna close up early." Then a group of loud and obnoxious men came in and perched themselves up against the bar. Drom had never seen them before. They were dressed smartly, like they came from somewhere really upmarket. This isn't an unusual occurrence, as Drom usually have the wealth of London slummit in his bar. Drom has a huge disliking for the entitled millennials that live off the bank of mum and dad. The millennial knobheads always thought they were a class higher than those who work in the service industry. The bar team would refer to them as arseholes. The men were very drunk, but Drom thought that one more wouldn't hurt. One of the drunken louts shouted, "Oi, oi, big boy," whilst clicking his fingers at Drom, obviously pointing out that Drom is a heavier set man. "Get us a bottle of your most expensive whiskey," he continued. Another voice bellowed, "Better get some nuts and olives too, unless you ate them all. Am I right, guys?" Everyone laughed at the original comedic outburst. Drom composed himself, as he is super professional, wiped away his tears, turned to the group and replied, "No problem, gents. I only like cashews anyway." No one laughed, and that was incredibly embarrassing for him. Drom looked at his head bartender and lifelong hetero friend Leo, who had already started pouring the 1966 Macallan Spey malt. This look alone spoke more than words. It tells that they both think this group of drunk men are actual bellends. Drom has overheard that one of them deals in antiques and was speaking about a map he has for the legendary Viking axe named Ingvar. Drom remembered reading an old Viking saga about this axe. It was used by an unknown warrior to take down the fire giant Surtur before it brought destruction to the world. The mega bellend goes on to say that it's in a cave on one of the roughest fjords in Sweden, by a village called Stangeneset. He gingerly took out the map to show his mates. He explained that he is going to flog the map for a few grand at the next auction. Drom's eyes fixed on the map, and it felt like it was just him and the map in the bar. A reason to piss off for a few months, Drom thought. Map. All that training over the last 5 years and all those episodes of Bear Grylls had led him to this moment. Mappy map. If only he could get that map. The adventure would be worth it alone, but to get an actual legendary axe, that would be close to orgasmic. Drom goes to the man. "Nice map, bro." The man replied, "Piss off, mate. It's worth more than you and this shitty little bar. You slag." "Fair enough," replied Drom. "Let me grab your empty glasses. We're closing up." This was met with abuse and a barrage of olive and nuts being thrown at Drom. Okay, Drom said, almost showing the emotional damage he received. "You guys have a big tab. I'll get you some complimentary shots with your bill." "Nice one, big lad," one of the bell ends shouted. "Leo, let's make these guys some signature belly face plants," Drom said smirkingly. The belly face plants is an old-school way of tipping intoxicated people over the edge, and for a bartender to get their own back, all in a shot glass. It has a mix of 80% rum called Uncle Ray, few dashes of Tabasco, a healthy drizzle of stale beer from the drip tray and lime juice. "Screw them, mate." Leo giggled, and they both giggled intensely, almost squealing while making the shots. Drom wanted that map, though. He didn't care at what cost, and he hated this group, 1,000 times more than the millennial arseholes that shit everywhere. He noticed the suitcase the map was in. He gave them their bill with the grim shots. "Cheers, fatty fatty boom boom," the drunkard said. "You're welcome, kind sirs," replied Drom with a quivering bottom lip. They split the tab in the most obscure way and knocked back the dodgy shots. 5 minutes passed and the shots started to take effect. The men got up and stumbled to the door. "Tonight, bye-bye," the men shouted as they left. A giggling Drom's eyes went to the table and he saw the case. He ran over and took the map, shut the case, and then shouted at the bloke, "Oi! Numpty, you forgot your briefcase." The smashed-up matey stumbled back, grabbing the briefcase, barely able to speak. "Egog, Frank Chew, biggerly, cute, sexy, fat man." But Drom didn't care. He had his map and the beginning of his new adventure. A week passed since Drom got the map, with Leo looking after the bar. Drom set off to Sweden with a few bits packed, making sure he had his lucky puffer fish, metal detector, and several copies of the map. He caught the cheapest flight he could and set off to Östersund. From there, it'd be a long coach journey and few hours hike to the village by the cave. Drom knew that he needed to speak to the locals about this cave. He wanted as much intel as possible. When he landed in Östersund, he took in the sights and tried to speak to some locals about the cave. No one knew what he was saying, but they were incredibly friendly. After a few hilarious integrations with the locals, it was time to go. Drom got on a coach to start his adventure to Stangenäset. After what seemed like hours on the coach, with Drom constantly fine-tuning his metal detector and stroking his lucky puffer fish, he's got to the first stop of his quest. The air smelt fresh with a slight hint of sulfur. "Well, that's not what you'd expect to smell," thought Drom. He looked around and saw gigantic trees, huge cliffs, and lush green fields. He looked over the cliff edge and saw a rough sea with waves as tall as the BT Tower. Drom placed his puffer fish on a rock, turned it so it would face him, and said, "Looks like we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto." After a 7-minute-long chuckle, he took out the map and started walking along the cliff's edge. He had a rough idea of where he was going, but really wanted to find some civilization before it got dark. After a few hours of following the map, he sees a few shack-like buildings in the distance and picks up the pace to get there. As he gets closer, he sees that it's a small village. He enters and the civilians stare at Drom. He opened his phrasebook and tried to communicate hedgevan. The English translation is "hello, friend." A sarcastic wave from one of the locals gave Drom hope that someone might be able to help him. A group of young women giggle at Drom. He looked in his phrasebook again. "Vakan jag fatag pamjod." Drom pronounced slowly and poorly. He was trying to ask where he could get a drink. One long-haired man with a strong jaw ran up to Drom and angrily shouted, "What did you just say about my mum?" "Nothing, mate. I'm just trying to get a drink," Drom confusingly replied. "Also, you speak English in this remote village?" "Yes, we also have Pepsi and Nintendo 64. "Ha ha 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 ha," joked the stranger. "I'm joking with you, guy. Come on, I'll take you to the tavern." As they walk down the road, the stranger, who's slowly becoming Drom's new friend, asks, "You must have traveled far. Why did you come here?" "To find something. Maybe you know of it?" Drom answered. "What are you looking for?" the stranger asked, intrigued. Drom spookily said, "A legendary axe named Ingvar, you know of it?" The man stops dead in his tracks, takes a deep breath and says to Drom, "We're gonna need that drink, buddy bean." They walked to a small tavern on the edge of the fjord. Drom sarcastically thought to himself, "Wow, this is so nice," and they enter. "Couple pints of Skål, please," Drom said to the barkeep, who looks to Drom's new buddy, and he translates. They sit at a table looking out over the fjord. The stranger takes a huge gulp of his beer without raising his pinky finger. Drom thought this was a really cool way to drink a pint. "I think there's more than just an axe in that cave," the stranger said, with his eyes staring at one point in the fjord. "The legend you might have heard. is of an unknown warrior who killed Surtur the fire giant with an axe, blah blah. The stranger then leans in and looks Drom in the eyes. Well, local legend here say that the warrior didn't kill it, he imprisoned it, and stood over the giant until the end of his days. Drom's eyes widened and he felt a little shiver in his bum. Did you smell the sulfur in the air? He continued. It's gotten heavier and heavier. I'm not one for tales, but at night you can see red flickers coming from that cave. Might cause a man to rethink what's real and what's myth. You still want to find that axe? Drom replied, I need to find that axe. Are you positive about that? The stranger asked in a lower voice. I'm not just positive, buddy. I'm HIV positive that I want to find that axe, Drom determinedly explained. The almost friend says to Drom, the water is treacherous, and there always seems to be a storm surrounding the area, like it has a mind of its own. No one has ever been able to cross it. It's so rough that no wildlife will go near there. The men walk back into the bar to get another drink. Drom asks, what's your name, stranger? It's Rope Enos, Mike Rope Enos. Drom laughed. In the time it took them to walk to the bar, Drom thought long and hard about his next move, whilst twizzling his top lip rug. He said to his new best friend, I'm going. Drom's bestie replied, well, tonight would be the best night to go. The current won't be as bad on the approach to the cave, but after you hit the surrounding waters, well, I don't know. You just gotta keep heading for the little flicker of light, I guess. It's been nice to meet you, Mike emotionally said. I'll get these drinks. I can't take a dead man's money. Drom smiled and finished the rest of his pint in one smooth gulp. There was at least 2/3 of the pint left, and he backed it like a legend. Everyone in the bar stood up and cheered the effort. It was flawless. Drom set off to the edge of the cliff and saw the flicker of light. He tightened the Velcro on his Kappa trainers and climbed down to the foot of the cliff. He wrapped his metal detector in a mix of Sainsbury's and Co-op bags for life, so it would be waterproof. He blew up his inflatable canoe, kissed his lucky puffer fish on the mouth, and set out on his way. Determined, he kept moving towards the flicker, not letting it leave his sight. The seas and wind grew more violent as he pressed forward. Nothing was standing in his way. He paddled and paddled, the waves grew bigger and bigger. Drom was being thrown around like a poorly made rag doll from Taiwan, but he pushed against the elements. The flicker of light was like a drug, and he was tweaking. A wave came over his head and sucked him into the murky abyss. The underwater current threw Drom around. He said to himself, this can't be it. This can't be where the adventure ends. And although the dark water was near blinding, he saw the flicker. Whether it was some divine intervention or Drom managed to find super strength, he swam against the current, holding only his metal detector and puffer fish. He waved his arms around and by some miracle hooked his detector on a branch that was attached to the cliffs. He pulled himself up and out the water. Soaked, cold, shattered and crying, he looked up and saw a huge opening to a cave. Drom painfully turns and looks at his puffer fish. He mumbles, he's only gone and bloody done it. A disorientated Drom picks himself up and is met with horrifying scenes of a violent ocean. He sees his canoe being smashed between waves like it was a sick and twisted game of tennis. The waves seemed to be enjoying themselves. The smell of sulfur was intense, and as Drom started walking into the depths of the cave, it became warmer. Now seems like a better time than never, Drom said to the pufferfish, whilst unwrapping his metal detector, and professionally starts to inspect the rock-ridden floor. As he moves further down the cave, the light became more apparent. The sounds of the waves crashing against rocks get quieter, until all he can hear is his footsteps and the noise of his well-tuned metal detector. The light of what was a flicker seems to intensify, and he can see the end of what can only be described as a corridor. A huge foyer stood in front of him that had light gleaming out of it. The heat became quite intense, but Drom walked on. The cave started to go more vertical, and Drom had to be careful walking down. At this point, he stopped using his metal detector. He swore he could hear light breathing in the distance. He continued walking, clutching his pufferfish like a weapon. All of a sudden, the ground goes near 90 degrees and Drom trips and falls. He hits his head on a rock and is out cold. An hour or two pass and Drom starts to come round. He feels a pain in his face. He runs his hand over to see that the spikes of his pufferfish had cut his cheek. Drom looks around. There's chains everywhere, but of a metal he's never seen before. He whips out his girthy metal detector, but no noise comes from it. The cave looked the same, but he could hear a very light heartbeat and deep breathing. What the fuck is that thing? Drom's eyes were filled by a monster of giant stature, coated in chains. It looked like a stone statue, but gave off a heat and was pulsing a red color. Drom stepped back, tripping over a chain. He fell into a skeleton that was in glorious Viking armor. There was an old bag next to it. Drom's curiosity got the better of him, and he went through the bag looking at all the skeleton's treasure. He was so excited that he completely forgot about the sleeping giant behind him. This stuff is all in fantastic condition, Drom thought to himself. He packed everything back into one of the bags for life that the metal detector was in, which surprised Drom that it is still usable. But then he saw what the skeleton was holding. A weapon of some kind. Curiously, said Drom. He had a much more intense shiver in his bum than earlier, at the pub. Drom reached over and took the handle very gently from the skeleton. Then it hit him. This skeleton is the unknown warrior that imprisoned the fire giant. The legend must be true. He stayed to watch over the giant till the end of his days. Well, that's some dedication if I ever saw it, thought Drom. However, the axe he wanted and pushed for was in his hands. The treasure of treasures. Drom was speechless. He had the axe, the legendary axe Ingvar. The blood from his face, caused by the pufferfish, dripped onto the steel. There seemed to be light canals which the blood ran through, and it spelt something out in Old Norse. With what little Norse Drom studied, he translated to himself, "Fuse your body and blood. Become one with the giant killer. Speak loud the name Ingvar." Drom felt a breath on the back of his neck and turned round to see, whom he now presumes is the fire giant, Surtur. It let out a loud scream and conjured a fireball. Drom, terrified, looked into Surtur's eyes, and then the giant threw the fireball at him. All Drom could do was cover his face with the hands that were holding the axe and his beloved puffer fish. The axe absorbed the fireball. Both Drom and Surtur looked shocked in amazement, as what seemed like a compressed force slowly went from the tip of the axe down the shaft and into Drom's big heart. A huge fire ignited from Drom's chest and engulfed him. He didn't burn nor feel pain, just a surge of energy running through him. His beloved fossil was slowly chipping away and fusing with the fire vortex that Drom was smothered by. Through the firestorm that surrounded Drom, he could see the giant growing bigger and changing form, whilst powering up another fireball. Drom let out a warrior's scream and ran at Surtur, aiming his axe at the giant. He felt his body get stronger as he ran, each part of his body slowly remolding with every step. The fire around him migrated to his new axe. He was transforming into a Viking. Drom swung the axe at Surtur, slicing through the giant's left patella tendon. You know the bit between your kneecap and shin? It hurts like a bastard. The axe smashing into the ground with the follow-through. There was what felt like an earthquake, and the ground under the surprised giant opened, swallowing him. Then there was silence. Drom looked behind him at the warrior's skeleton. The armor was not on the remains of the Viking, but on him, and it fit perfectly. He touched his face, and it felt different. Drom picked up the full bag for life and ran back to the cave entrance. His new axe, Ingvar, was still on fire, like it was a permanent flame. Drom dunked it in the water, but it wouldn't go out, nor did it make that satisfying sizzle noise. But as the sun was rising, Drom caught his reflection in the water. His head was an oversized puffer fish, but his body was like a Viking warrior's, armor and all. "I'm like some sort of Viking puffer fish," Drom laughed to himself, still in shock. "But I've found the unknown warrior, and I've found Ingvar." As soon as he mutters the name, a fire ignited around him, and as quick as a flash, he was back to looking like the owner of the badger's beard. He remembered what the engraving on the axe said. "Fuse your body and blood, become one with the giant killer, speak loud the name." Drom stops himself and smiles, then looks over the once furious ocean, which is now calm and peaceful. He says, "Ingvar." The fire circles Drom again. He then changes into his adopted persona, the Viking puffer fish.